Hi, welcome to Yachting International Radio. You're with Karine from the Crew Coach on your mental health. And today I have a guest, a wonderful guest, Steve, who's going to share his story with us. Steve's very active in the mental health space, and unfortunately he lost his son to suicide. So we're going to talk a bit about that, the signs, what to look out for, and how to help someone who is grieving. So Steve, I'd love to know a bit about your journey, your background before we begin.
Yeah, good morning, Karine. Good to talk to you. My journey, if we look at the last 10 years, I've been involved in the business world from a social media perspective, working with clients all over the world, showing them really how to use LinkedIn and social media from a business perspective. And in fact, on December the 4th last year, I was delivering a training session to an automotive client in the Midlands in the UK here. Got back to my car, was about to drive home, about a 3-hour drive home, and saw the phone as I literally put it into the holder of the dashboard there. I saw Jordan's girlfriend's name come up on the screen. Maybe not totally unusual, but I thought, okay, that's odd. She doesn't always just call me. And then, as you mentioned, that's when I got the call. I think it was 4:22, sorry, on December the 4th, and telling me what had happened, that Jordan had taken his life. So, in that instant, after 10 years of being out there, speaking at conferences, being front of house for companies, training, the rug was kind of pulled, right out from underneath me. So. To say that kind of day changed things is probably an understatement, really.
Absolutely. So was this December just gone?
Yeah. So we're now coming up, in fact, next week, we put a marker every 4th of the month, and May the 5th will be 4 months. 5 months, sorry. Yeah.
And how are you going? How are you going with that?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because it's one I'm asked a lot. Probably want to ask of myself, those close to me asking, and amongst the family, we've got a huge support network. Jordan had a phenomenal network of friends. We've got really close family. My wife, who's Jordan's stepmom, and Jordan's mum, who get on incredibly well. We have this huge support network. They're still, obviously struggling in lots of ways. I kind of made a decision really early on. I kind of ended up, maybe it's my background in leadership and management development and training, and done a lot of work on myself probably over the years as well in terms of self-awareness. I was probably going to be the natural person of the family who kind of said, right, someone needs to take kind of control here. And although it's the most awful time, and I was suffering all kinds of panic attacks and other things going on with me, I kind of took the reins and started organizing what needed to be organizing and trying to look after everybody else. About 3 weeks afterwards, I kind of decided I needed to get this out somehow, what was going on. And everyone said, a few close friends of mine said, keep notes of what's going on, just write down wherever you do. And because I was someone who's published on LinkedIn and had, a large network of followers for many years, I thought, right, well, let me just write an article on LinkedIn. I don't know whether I'm going to publish it or what I'll do. So I wrote this article. It was titled "The Day My Son Took His Own Life." It was pretty hard hitting. It started with that phone call from Charlotte to myself.
Yeah.
My finger kind of hovered over the publish button. I think it's got to be, it felt like 10 minutes. It probably was 5 minutes. I don't know. But I thought, well, why are you doing this, Steve? Well, is this for you? Is this for other people? Well, what's the plan here? Yeah. I just thought, in the end, look, if it helps kind of one person, it's worth doing. And I just hit the publish button, and that was kind of it, Karine. Really, my world just went a little crazy after that, as the article took off globally, huge outpouring of sympathy. But then the communications I started getting from professionals in the world of psychology and psychotherapy, who were saying things like, you kind of articulated what this moment is like, probably far better than any written papers we've seen, because it's kind of raw and to the point. I had people who had lost loved ones to suicide, people who were contemplating suicide literally that week.
Wow.
It was just huge. And then, you know, when I wake up to my email box and see the likes of Ariana Huffington emailing me one morning and
Gosh,
go,
that's incredible.
wow, okay, yeah. So it's been an interesting journey. And of course, what I've done since then is continue to kind of publish and post and
Okay.
share the story, in hopefully a considered way, but really pulling no punches.
Yeah.
You know, I thought people got to know what this is like, really, from all the different perspectives, because it is probably, out of all the deaths that you can, bereavements you can go through and experiences, one of the worst, I believe, that's out there, for lots of reasons, probably that we can probably talk about.
Absolutely. So, with regards to, if we stay on that topic about the response you got on LinkedIn and the outpour, what was the most significant message or something that resonated with you the most?
Yeah, that's really easy to identify. I think the first thing for me, and if you understand a little bit of background within the immediate family, Jordan's girlfriend Charlotte was just about to qualify as a clinical forensic psychologist.
Gosh.
Literally just putting a dissertation in. Jordan's mum had been a senior mental health nurse for many years.
Yeah.
So you kind of imagine what they've been going through in their
Imagine.
heads with all this. So we had a lot of knowledge. I didn't have that knowledge, didn't have that experience, didn't really understand the issues. And you know, there were probably occasions where Jordan's mum was worried about him, and I go, man, it's kind of just maybe Jordan. He's having a, you know, not a good time, and I'll chat to him. We'll maybe go out and we'll have a beer. And gosh, my learning has changed in 5 months. I can tell you. So, what was the most significant thing? I think recognizing the massive issue, the fact that 800,000 people a year complete suicide, that for every one of those, another 20 are probably contemplating or have attempted.
Yeah.
And you kind of put that into perspective of coronavirus at the moment, you know, which is horrific. That
Yes.
will still not kill as many people
Yes.
as suicide. And when you kind of put that into perspective, because it's been on, you know, it's everywhere, isn't it, on the news, and yet suicide, for reasons I kind of understand, isn't, because of some of the stigma around it, because of the risk maybe of publicizing it and the risk of other people thinking this might be an option. So lots of reasons. But that's the most significant thing. I think the realization of how massive a problem, a pandemic, you know, suicide is.
Yes. So I know in Australia we've got an average, I think it's 7 or 8 men choose to end their life a day, and working in the maximum security predominantly with men. But that statistic, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something. And I was already thinking about working in the yachting industry. And then I thought, well, what about all the other isolating industries? You've got the FIFOs, you've got the police force. There's just so many out there. Cruise ships or the Navy, defense. And I spent time with people veterans who came back from war. I spent a day with them talking about it. They were all self-medicating because of the pain that I had to go through. And I felt angry towards the system that there wasn't a seamless through care, and they were just falling through the gaps and saying young men take their life. Yet I think I started seeing it on Instagram, and it was just harrowing. It's shocking. And I feel like as a community we can do more. And what I noticed working with men in prison is that they don't know how to ask for help because they were never taught to. And even to express feelings, it's like, A, I'm a man, I can't be vulnerable. And then B, I'm in jail, so if I was vulnerable, that could get me into a lot of trouble. So it's dealing with a lot of barriers. But what I am seeing more on social media is are men talking about it more. But are we to be able to truly identify when someone needs help, as you said? So is it the fact that, okay, well, we're skilled, we're trained in it, but are we, when it's loved ones, are we in denial that there's something really serious going on? So
Hmm.
Know that on another part of it, what stood out for me, what you shared was I should have, or I could have, or what if, and all those things that are just circulating in your mind. And
Mm.
for me, that would probably be the hardest thing, which I empathize with, because I mean, to have those thoughts and your beautiful son, and how how do you work through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I've been speaking with Jordan's girlfriend, just the other day, and given her background, her experience, her training, and she's written some beautiful blogs just in recent couple of weeks. Finally, kind of stuff she's kind of written to herself, but is finally kind of putting out there. And she said, "Look, I've had all the training. I know how I should be dealing with this. I know about the ridiculous nature of blaming and what ifs and all that." She said, "I understand that. Yeah, inside you can't help but question, could I have done something? Could I have done more?" And I think we're all going to think that, aren't we? I think the more we learn about suicide, the more we learn about depression, we recognize, yes, there are things we can do. But the challenge for us when you're particularly close to someone is that you can't be as objective in that approach. So Charlotte's, to all intents and purposes, living with Jordan, helping him through this. But, Jordan was a very protective individual of us as a family. So he would rarely share that until the recent weeks. Now I recognize many signs that were calls to action, which I didn't appreciate at the time. But so, how do you push someone that, if you push too far, might resist you and shut down completely, and you kind of lose the relationship? And in Jordan's case, that was a fear that we may push him too far and he'd just switch off. So, when you're very close to someone, you deal with it almost with kid gloves, where someone who is trained and objective and a third party can just go in and ask those questions. But it's getting people into the system, which you've rightly mentioned, which is in the UK dreadful. I mean, everyone's falling through the gaps. The government's done a huge amount in the UK to raise awareness, so they've put a tick in that box and probably feel very pleased with themselves. But the level of secondary care is atrocious. It's disjointed. A lot of very well-meaning people trying to do good things. But if you're in that space and you're challenged with your mental health, where on earth do you go? Where is somewhere for me personally? It's a minefield for them, and to be honest, the system is poor. It's atrocious.
Yes, and I can concur with that, because I've got clients who are from the UK, and I've heard from their experience, and they can't get help until they're at the point of slitting their wrists.
You've absolutely got to have done that, literally, to get the emergency services, NHS crisis teams to come in. You've literally got to have attempted, or be at that point, and you think, really? I mean, that's just crazy.
So what is the solution to that?
Well, I think as the work I've started to do now through the legacy that I'm creating in Jordan's memory, and a recent position I've taken with an organisation called Champion Health, a new young tech startup, very exciting organisation. I think there's two things we need to do. I think, firstly, I think we're all aware of mental health and depression, and I think although the stigma is still very high from those people suffering with it, more than 90% of people suffering with a mental illness or poor mental health still feel there's a stigma attached. So it's still very, very high, but people are more aware. So, okay, we're aware. The challenge is, what do I do? And what we need to do is be able to equip parents, loved ones, co-workers, whoever it may be, with the knowledge and the tools to be able to recognize what some of the signs may be, and then what to do. I mean, I'll give you an example of that through the work I'm doing now through Champion Health, when essentially it's a platform of personal health assessments and reports for companies and training to help organizations. And in the very early days of the founder, Harry, putting this together, he presented the what he got so far as a platform to a good friend of his who was a very successful director of a wealth management company. 2 young children, lovely wife, raised over £750,000 for charity, had it all going on. And Harry presented what he was doing. And this chap said, James, he was called, said, I think it's fantastic what you're doing, Harry, but we've got things covered pretty well in our company. We've got first aiders, we've got all the response people there if there's a crisis. So he said it's probably not for us, but kind of wish you luck. Now I can tell you that about 14 months, if that later, James took his own life.
James,
after the guy that Harry puts this with, who had everything going on, and that was after just 2 weeks of work-related stress.
Yeah.
Now the point here, coming back to the point we just made, is one person recognized the signs, and that was the receptionist of the business.
Okay.
She didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So they had first aiders, they had people that could respond in a crisis, but what they didn't have was people who knew how to spot the signs and be able to step in a preventative way to ever let it get to that point. And I think this is particularly, Karine, where we need to get to. If I now look back at Jordan's WhatsApp messages, which I was just doing a couple of days ago again, and the last 4 or 5 talking about the poor night's sleep he was having, didn't get to sleep till 2 last night, Dad, really struggling with sleep, not sleeping well at the moment. 5.5 months ago, that was Jordan was having some poor sleep. God, that's rough. I hope he can get some sleeping tablets. Now, with the knowledge that I have, I recognize that is absolutely a warning sign that someone is in major depression.
Not enough sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, sleep is one of it's a real sign when people start really struggling with their sleep. You've got really, those are alarm bells, and some kind of action needs to be taken in terms of, look, I'm really concerned about you. If you're not sleeping this well, this is not a good sign. Along with other things, we know Jordan was on medication then for depression, and those signs are right. We need to get you some help now. Let's not mess about with this. Let's get you to speak to somebody right now. And we kind of did, at the end, Jordan, had a doctor's appointment. He was prescribed fluoxetine and another antidepressant that had worked well in the past for him. But always had this initial period of about a week to 10 days where they take you these types of drugs very low. We know that if you have suicide tendencies now, that those drugs are probably not ideal. But he presented to the doctor, and the doctor asked him directly, and Jordan said, no, I'm not considering it.
Yeah.
We've now found journals in Jordan's house since we've been in that he's written from 2 years ago when he was first researching suicide. Sorry, that was back in 2015.
He was researching.
5 years ago. Yeah, 5 years ago. He was already looking at options for suicide. So, it's, there were no signs that, he went through episodes of depression, Karine, and they weren't great. They were nowhere near as bad as this time. He even described this as kind of the worst of any of his episodes. But the thing is, we've no idea what's going on underneath. We've no idea those journals have been written, those thoughts are happening. So all we can do is look out for some telltale signs of lack of concentration at work, let's say, not as engaged with colleagues as you've been before, isolation, poor sleep, these kind of things, alcohol perhaps, so there are a number of things. And I think the most important thing, Karine, that we all have to do, because this is major, we now know the numbers of people suffering with poor mental health is huge. We can't afford to kind of pussyfoot around anymore. We have to be direct with people, sit down and talk with people. And, as I put in that article, just ask that really difficult question. Look, tell me, how are you really doing? Not how are you today? How are you really doing today? Because tomorrow can be different.
Yes.
But how are you really doing today? And I think we need to be braver in asking those questions.
And also, like from my end, as a clinician or therapist, you've got confidentiality. And I think people can be afraid of that and go, oh, well, she confided in me and said this, and they said, don't tell anyone. But someone's life comes over that therapeutic relationship or that relationship. Like, you have as a duty to report that as soon as possible. And it's hard on the super yachts because it's quite discriminatory in terms of there's a lack of education. So if you've got a mental health issue, if you've got depression or bipolar, they won't hire you because they're afraid, they don't know what to do. And only realizing the need for mental health first aid.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because if I suffer with any form of depression, anxiety, and it's clinically diagnosed, and I'm faced with an employer who doesn't get it, doesn't understand it, doesn't show that level of empathy, doesn't have a mental well-being process or program in place, then understandably, I'm going to keep this a pretty closely guarded secret on a real need to know basis. So again, I think one of the things that needs to change is that organizations and companies need to open their eyes to the fact that right underneath their noses today are probably, on average, from the stats we're seeing at the moment, around about 11% of their employees who at some point will have had some form of suicidal ideation. That's the numbers at the moment. So you think of any company, 50 employees, 100 employees, 1,000 employees, 11% on average at some point. Can you spot who they are? Would you know who they were? Probably not at all. But we have to change the culture in society. We have to change it, particularly in organizations where most of us spend, a good chunk of our lives, really. That has to change. And you know what? I do feel that if the stigma therefore was removed or reduced significantly, that would help a lot of people. Finally, there's a release saying, look, I can kind of talk, I can let people know I've got this, and I can maybe even accept it myself that I've got depression and kind of work through strategies. But if my fear is I can't mention this to anyone, I mean, what sort of pressure is that to kind of carry around on top of what you've already got?
Yeah. So you're carrying that burden, just it's on your shoulders. And the fact that you mentioned that Jordan was thinking about taking his life like 5 years ago, or doing the research or the planning. And I mean, that's a significant amount of time to be experiencing that and going through that, and how, we do need to be aware of those signs and not to be afraid to talk about it. And I know from the same end, that for on your end, a lot of a crew, I did a poll, or I did some Instagram story not so long ago, and they wanted to ask, how do you approach someone that is grieving? Because I mean, I've done studies around it and training around it,